Alex Winter directed the documentary film Showbiz Kids. I'm at Noble Gold Derby, here to ask you, Alex, from this series, what was the main sort of thing you were wanting to say or reveal about the life for child actors?
I don't know if there was one single thing that I was interested in. Though I suppose looking back on it now, having finished it, I think that the theme that emerged out of the process was this idea of universality, that no matter how different our experiences were coming up in the industry, whether we were at the turn of the century or present day with 20 million Instagram followers, that the experiences were very, very similar. So there was a kind of identification that I think all the subjects ended up having.
Yeah. And you yourself were a child actor. What from your own experience did you sort of bring in, and how did that sort of inform the sort of stories you were telling?
Well, the doc is in some ways somewhat autobiographical. I'm kind of telling my own story through others, and others are telling their stories through others. So it was, I think the motivation to make this grew from a feeling I had that I had never really seen our stories told in a nuanced way. It's either very tabloid and sensational or extremely superficial. But the kind of full range of experience I'd never seen before. And I think that motivated me because I had lived it.
Mm. Was there anyone that, like, when they were telling their story or giving their perspective, that sort of like you connected with and you sort of thought, oh, like, I know what that's like, or, oh, like, I hadn't thought about it in that way before, but that's speaking to me?
Yeah, it was a much more cathartic experience than I expected, just because I've been around a long time and I've processed my own past, and I've worked with a lot of child actors as a director over the years. It was much more surprising and revelatory than I expected in that way, where I would sit with, say, Diana Sarah Carey, who was 100 years old when I interviewed her, and she was acting in 1918. I didn't expect to, and she just opened her mouth and my story came out of her mouth. And it was wonderful to be honest with you. And then I would have that, and I realized once that happened the first time that was going to happen every time, and it did. It's sort of each person that spoke, I felt a kind of extraordinary kinship with. And I think for many of them, it was mutual.
Mm. What about the choice that you sort of made with the film to not just tell the sort of story of past child actors, but also to have a look into aspiring child actors and people that are sort of currently sort of successful or unsuccessful, but looking to get into the business?
Well, I wanted to the film was primarily a conversation or an exploration with people who have come up as child actors, and we're looking back at that experience. But I wanted to contrast that with something that would give the viewer a sense of what it actually felt like to do that work. And so I chose two actors, one who was just starting out, Mark, and another one, Demi, who had already had quite a bit of success, to show kind of two sides of that experience. And in a way, you kind of are both of those kids when you're a child actor. I really related to both of them. I was both of them. I think all of us had been. So I think it was a way to sort of show everything from the mundane to the inspiring, to the sad, to, fearful, whatever, kind of the full range of a human experience, but on the ground in an immediate way.
Mm. You've said that, like, in sort of your career, you've also directed child actors. How does your sort of experience as a child actor, and even like just from your experience of talking with other child actors, inform the way you direct child actors?
Well, I have a great deal of compassion for them. I'd say a smidge of concern. So there's a little vigilance going on usually. I'm very aware of how a child actor wants to be spoken to, generally speaking, because everyone's a little different, obviously. Yeah. So I tend to speak to a child actor the way I would have liked to have been spoken to, and often was by directors when I was a child. I worked with a lot of great people when I was a child actor who handled kids really well. So I think that's helpful, but it's also helpful because I'm a dad. So it's helped me to communicate with parents, and to be there for the parents of the child actors who often have a great deal of questions themselves.
Yeah. I think my video's cut out, but you can hear me, right?
Yep. Just fine.
Good. Yeah. Fantastic. What do you think, what is your, I guess, like, what do you, like, looking back on, and actually after speaking to so many people that are child actors, do you think show business is like a good place for children or not a good place for children?
I think it depends on a lot of factors. I think that there's a lot that can go wrong. It's a very, no matter how cut out you are for that industry, it's an extremely stressful and competitive business for a child to be in who is still dealing with their own development. Your brain as a child is not the same as your brain as an adult in very specific neurological ways, right? So your brain is doing all this work to develop and grow. And there you are in a hyper adultified environment. So I would say that I wouldn't, be hyperbolic about warning people off of doing it altogether. I think someone like Cameron Boyce, who's sadly no longer with us, he was born to be in front of a camera. Mara Wilson, I would argue the same for myself. I knew at the age of 5 that I wanted to be on stage, and I got on stage and I enjoyed myself. And but that being said, there are consequences, and those consequences are unavoidable. They aren't necessarily grave, but they are there. And I think that anyone who's getting their child into the business should be aware that it will not be without consequence for them, the parents, and for the child.
Do you reckon, like, culturally things have gotten better for child actors in Hollywood, or do you think it just varies from set to set and experience to experience?
I think it varies. I think that there are a lot of ways in which things have improved. Child labor laws have improved. You have things like the Coogan Law, which protects a child's income. There are people on set now who were not there before. I think the Me Too movement has been extraordinarily helpful in opening up a dialogue that would make it safer for a child if they were so inclined to speak out. It's very, very hard for a child, for anyone really, to speak out if they're being abused, if that's a situation that happens to the kid. But in many ways, it's improved. I would say it's kind of almost evened out in terms of stress, because at the same time as you have all of these benefits that have appeared, you have the rise of social media. And I think that being a child actor today, where you're under a microscope 24/7 because of your Instagram account or your Twitter account or just TMZ or whoever, the internet being kind of a 24/7 fisheye lens on a child. I think that's a huge stressor. I don't think I would have handled that particularly well when I was that age. I very much like my privacy. So I think that's a huge stressor for kids to accommodate, but there are other areas that have improved.
Yeah, it was so interesting hearing some of them and how they had responded to or were affected by Roger Ebert reviews, like back in the day, and just the access now to reviews and opinions and like dissections of anyone, not just kid actors, is enormous. And
yeah, it seems positively quaint, doesn't it? That's why we included it. That pretty much the worst you could get in those days was a thumbs up or a thumbs down. From Roger and Gene, whereas today you can be absolutely eviscerated, and not only by critics but by the public, because everyone has got a voice in the age of the internet, and they're very vocal, and it's pretty much inescapable. You can't really opt out of that world or log off of that world. It's kind of in your face all the time. And I think that's hugely stressful, I think, for adults as well as for kids, but certainly for a child coming up, that's very stressful.
Yeah, who's like, I guess, as you said before, is like not like they're a child. They've got a child's way of processing things, and it's a very sort of adult world, and like, they're having to do very adult things, having a lot of people criticize you on the internet. Like,
yeah. Exactly. And look, as grown-ups and even people outside
Yep.
the entertainment industry, that's really no fun. So imagine what
No.
that's like if you're 9 years old and in show business, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. Um, yeah. I think also like what's interesting is like when you start like anything at a young age like that, it sort of becomes your normal. It's sort of like you don't know what other experiences are like that, but it can become a normal. And what do you think is sort of what was something maybe for you or for someone you interviewed in the film, uh, something that was interestingly normal for their experience?
There's a lot. Trying to narrow that down. I mean, one of the things I really liked about the kids that I shot, Demi and Mark, was both of their parents were really grounded and great and kind of adamant about providing them with as much of a regular childhood as they could alongside the work they were doing that was clearly not average, which is extremely important. I think that if you are really born to be in this space, then that is normal for you. For me, as a child actor, I was more comfortable on stage than I was on a soccer field. I derived more joy being in the imaginative world of theater and the industry than I did from doing some of the more, quasi, what would be called average normal child activities. So I think I found that with a lot of the people I interviewed. I think Mara Wilson, Mara has great things to say about the way she occupied herself on set and as a very, very young child, and the sort of the world of imagination and play that you can get into in that environment. So it's a juggling act because there isn't a single kid who's professional who doesn't have somewhat of a normal life, and so you're just juggling that much more life often.
Yeah, or Evan Rachel Wood, who's like doing things like juggling or yo-yos or hacky sacks or whatever you can do on your own, whatever you can master on your own.
That's right. Yeah. And carving out a life for yourself in a very strange environment, I think is something. Kids are very adaptable. So I think you find a way. When I was a kid, I did 2 Broadway shows back to back, and we just, the theaters were our playground, and we would just take over. When we were in between a matinee and an evening show, we would just scatter out. We would roller skate on the stage. We would go up into the light booths. That place was our playground. And we had imaginative play in that world like one would have, in their backyard.
Was it different talking with people who like their experience as a child actor was being on a set with like other kids and like having that as a big part of the world, as opposed to some actors who their experience is more, they're the one kid on the show or the one kid in the film and they're just surrounded only by adults?
There's a lot of solidarity with child actors when they're working with other child actors. And it becomes somewhat by nature a more natural, a more average environment because you just fall into child play. Having done both of those kinds of roles when I was a kid, I enjoyed doing plays that were where I was the only kid. I think I did Our Town once where I was the only child, and I did something else where I was the only child. And it was something kind of special and fun about it, but it could get quite boring and disorienting because it just wasn't my world. And the adults didn't really know what to do with a kid. You're kind of an interloper in their world. Whereas when I did King and I, where there was a ton of kids, or Peter Pan, where it was me and the Lost Boys, we had a blast. We went absolutely crazy, probably to the dismay of everyone around us, but it made a big difference.
Yeah. What was there anything that anyone said in your interviews with them that sort of surprised you or shed a new light on something?
Yes, I had a few of those. I had a few epiphanal moments for myself, which was surprising because I've been swimming in this world for a long time, and I've done a lot of work with other child actors or even, victims of child sexual abuse and trauma, things like that. It's a world I've been involved in for a very long time. I don't think I know it all. I mean, I'm constantly evolving and learning things, but I thought I had this ground pretty well covered. And I think a few people illuminated things for me. Diana Sarah Carey had a really interesting perspective on the difficulty she had transitioning from child acting into the real world and finding her identity as an adult. And she conveyed that. I identified very much with that. I had a similar situation. In fact, that's why I stopped acting in my mid-20s. I've been acting since, by then for 15 years, and I needed to stop and figure out who the hell I actually was. But she had a really interesting perspective on kind of finding your identity and kind of defragmenting and becoming whole that I thought was really insightful, frankly. And not something I'd really heard before, but I related to it very much. And several of the other interviewees I had also related to that.
What about, like, for yourself, going from like a childhood where you're in front of the camera or on the stage, in front of the audience, moving to sort of a behind the camera role as an adult and going more into directing, or at least in part into directing? What was that like for you?
Well, as a child, I started making films when I was 8, 9 years old, like a lot of little kids who like making movies. I had a Brownie 8mm camera, and I had a little acting troupe of all my best friends, and we made films all the time. And I had rewinds in my basement, and I would edit them. And so even when I was on Broadway, I was aiming myself to go to film school, and I went to NYU, and then I came out of NYU Film School. And that's when I did the movies, Bill and Ted and Lost Boys and things like that. So, and by then I was directing professionally. I was directing commercials and music videos and all kinds of things. So they kind of always ran in tandem. It's just one was considerably more public than the other. So there wasn't ever really a transition. I just kind of, at a certain point in my mid-20s, I wanted to focus more on my writing and directing. And frankly, I just wanted to break from the public eye. I just felt it was unhealthy for me at that time. And I wanted to grow up out of the public eye, because I'd done almost all of my development very much in public, and it wasn't particularly healthy. So I just continued to write and direct, but I love acting and I continued to train. And to me, it's all kind of one big blob of things that I do.
Yeah. I was not a child actor. Most of the viewers of Showbiz Kids will not be child actors themselves. What did you want people like me to understand about the life of kids in showbiz that we may have been unaware of?
I think that it is a really unique and extraordinary experience, but it is also a universal experience to the degree that they are just children. And childhood is tough for anybody, right? It's also wonderful and magical and inspiring, but it's stressful and difficult as well. I think that the film is really about, in some ways, about the universality of childhood, and that while one is in public and you have the stressors of being in public and the stressors of working in an adultified environment, your experiences are really similar to other children. And I think people are captivated by people in the entertainment industry. So in a way, the film is a bit of a Trojan horse, because it's using the allure of child acting to make, I think, broader statements about what it means to be a child in modern society, and where those children are protected and where they're not protected.
And finally, Alex, what advice would you give to a child going into showbiz? A kid going into showbiz, what would you tell them? What's the one thing they need to know?
I think it would be more for the parents. I think a kid going into show business really doesn't know what is going on, even if they think they do. And I think I'd be more wary of the kid who acts like they have it all together than I would of a kid who is asking questions. I think it's what I said before. The advice I give to parents and to kids is, if it's what you absolutely love to do and it is your passion, and you're not doing it because your parents want you to do it, and you're not doing it because you want to be an Instagram star, but you genuinely love the work, it's a wonderful thing to do. And it just does not come without consequence. Being in an adultified world that's that stressful and competitive and frankly, potentially perilous, does not come without consequence. So you have to have your eyes open to that possibility.